All right. By the clock here at City Hall, it is 3 p.m. So I will go ahead and call the Monday, December 5th, 2022 Design Review Committee to order at 3 p.m. And for the record, I can see that both committee members are present, as is planning official Thornborrow, and the city staff, Veal, as well as Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
All right. Seeing none, we can move to the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is old business, a change to subdivision fiscal year 2021 number 6, SoUL Subdivision. Ms. Delgado, would you like to present the changes? The request?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
I believe Stack Rock has joined the call as well if they're not there in person. And I believe they'll be able to give a better explanation as to the changes that we are trying to make right now.
This is Jesse with Stack Rock Group. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the changes that we are requesting from the previous iteration that was approved, before we had 3 class 2 trees along 35th. However, since coordination with ACHD and also further development of our construction drawings, ACHD is not going to permit us any trees within the clear vision triangle, which we previously anticipated being able to limb up. And so we have to omit 2 of those trees. There's also some storm seepage beds, drain inlets, and other facilities that we cannot have within 10 feet. The other issue that we're facing here is there's a transformer on that southwest corner as well, that we cannot have vegetation within a certain distance of that, being 3 feet around 3 sides and 10 feet on the front. So the closest that we can come to meeting the requirements is we were able to have 1 class 2 tree along 35th and utilize the 2-to-1 substitution rule of 2 class 1 trees for each class 2 tree. And so to best accommodate this, we have 4 very tight class 1 trees as close to the street as we can get. We did shy away from doing a larger canopy because that forces us to push those trees further into the site and farther away from the street. So we've got some implications based on what ACHD has already acknowledged that they're not going to allow, and then also just some clearances with utilities.
Thank you. And just one item for the record, might you be able to spell your last name for me, please?
Oh, I apologize. I'm Jesse Buster with Stack Rock Group at 404 South 8th Street, Suite 300A. And it's spelled, my first name is Jesse, Jesse. Last name is Buster, Buster.
Thank you. Okay, any questions for Mr. Buster? Staff, do you have anything that you would like to add?
I don't necessarily have anything to add. I had included a staff memorandum for the record, and I stand by that staff report. So if you have any questions regarding the memorandum, I can certainly answer them. Code does allow for the replacement or substitution law, and that is for every class 1 or 2 street tree, they can replace it with a class or 2 class 1 trees, but those trees are required to be within the frontage area of the street side, and more specifically within the this would be a streetscape versus a planter strip on 35th Street. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is not noticed as a public hearing. This is just whether or not the changes are within the scope of the original approval.
So the substitution is fine. It's just the fact that they're not on the frontage, those 4 new smaller trees. Is that what's kind of a hang up for it just working in general?
Yeah, so the frontage there on 35th Street requires 3 frontage trees. So it's the 1 per frontage and then 2 or 1 per 50 linear feet. So that's requiring the additional 2 street trees. And within the decision document itself for the subdivision, they were required to have those trees that were originally approved stay as such because it was compliant, or at least be street trees or streetscape trees. And I'm just going to share my screen for the audience here.
For the audience, it looks like there's a number of people that are here to testify. If you wish to testify, please make sure to sign up and please. Your request for that.
So that one right there is the proposed, correct?
Correct, yes, this is the proposed landscape. So we have the conflict with the utilities essentially, and then the clear vision triangle, which is eliminating the 2 trees, I'll call it to the south, that were originally proposed, which I can scroll up to the original approvals. So the furthest south tree towards the bottom of the screen is no longer permitted to be there per ACHD's policies, and same with that middle tree.
Gosh, it looks like that one in the proposed, that the 1 tree that's still there close to the vision triangle is even more in conflict than what was there before. Not sure what the deal is with that.
Yeah, it looks like the sidewalk triangle ends before it, and then the corner one, it's kind of tucked right in the triangle of the two triangles.
Mhm.
And someone educate me on the clear vision triangle when it's separated, because basically we have one for the sidewalk and then we have one for the street, right? Is there a way to create a triangle so you see someone walking on the sidewalk, and then there's another triangle so you see someone as you cross the street, and a tree can kind of be between the ends of those two triangles? Or is it just one large sweeping area?
This is Jesse with Stack Rock. It's ultimately a large sweeping area. The triangle on the intersection of Carr and 35th per ACHD, those are 40 by 40 as measured along the curbs and then where they intersect. And then the two for the drive are measured from the property line 10 foot in and then 20 foot down, and then you extend it. So that ultimately is what wipes out all of the space. And I do want to add that the design team has exhausted every possible avenue to try to figure this out as far as moving storm and trying to do a ride in and no exit, and it all got shut down. So
And that's what I was curious about, is, wondering where that 10-foot leg started, and at the property line answers my question, because I was trying to put one at the sidewalk and one at the driveway, and then there's a little place where you can tuck that southern tree in and kind of make it work. Or like you were saying, that's where I went to with well, if we're driving out on Namaste Lane, we're to the north, so that triangle doesn't need to be as far north. But yeah, I'm sure you treated it like a puzzle, like I did in my mind too. And what about transformer? Where has that puzzle piece slid around?
That's decided by Idaho Power, and that's ultimately where they said that it's going to be located. So we didn't have any pushback there, and that also just locates that space for the clearances. But
yeah.
I think with the constraints that have to be dealt with here, and trying to get what we want on the streetscape and the right amount of landscaping. I guess I feel the applicants made the effort to get that in there, and I really don't know that we can require anything more. I think that I'm okay with these changes that are proposed.
Yeah, I trust that the team has tried to figure it out in every possible scenario. So I think it can move forward with however, Hanna, you were proposing, whether that's just a staff kind of approval or what.
Do we need a motion? I mean, I can move to approve the changes as submitted.
That would be great, since you did that.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing for design review fiscal year 2022 number 19. It's for the construction of a new multifamily mixed-use structure located at 4044 Adams Street. Again, it does look like there's a number of people that are here related to this item. If you do wish to testify, if you could please sign up and put your sign-in sheet in the basket. And with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant to present the application.
Chad Weltzin, Erstad Architects, 310 North Fifth Street. Thank you, committee, for hearing us today. We had a pre-application conference, of course, back in August with you. And since then, we've made a few changes based on what we heard there. And so I'll be happy to go through those today. The first thing I wanted to just confirm or clarify on the agency comments portion of your staff report. As far as Boise Fire, we were in contact with them. We understood they had some questions about the internal workings of the automated parking system and their fire access into there. That has since, to my knowledge, been resolved. We uploaded some slightly revised plans to satisfy the information that they wanted added to our floor plans. And we've also provided that to the city as well. So as far as I know, that comment has been satisfied. Ada County Highway District, they did contact us about a month ago, notifying us that they're questioning the exact location of our ingress and egress driveway into the property. And we showed them all the reasons why we have located it how we have. They indicated that we would need to submit a waiver request. We've done that about a month ago now, but we have not heard any response yet as to whether that's accepted. So at our pre-application hearing in August, really the primary sticking point that we talked about quite a bit was parking, and was what constitutes a parking structure, which is not an allowed use in this zone district, and did our building just have an excessive amount of parking? It didn't feel like a residential building. The proportions felt disproportional. So in response to that, we've made some serious changes. We heard that that was a concern. We've actually eliminated one entire deck of parking, bringing the numbers down. And we, at the time, because the city code definition just says that a parking structure is defined as the predominant use of a site for parking automobiles, surface or structured. We discussed what that really means, and everyone was in agreement that we just want to see, more than 50% of the site being used for the multifamily project and its required parking. We actually went back after that hearing, did the math, even on the project as it was designed at that point, and we already were beyond 50% of the floor area being used for the project. But regardless, to put the issue to rest, we went ahead and eliminated one entire deck of parking, which did in some ways make our building more efficient, allowed some floor levels to flush out better. The result is that now we are down to only 16% of the floor area of the building is being used for non-required parking spaces. So the number of spaces went from 113 down to 75. And again, it's only 16% of the floor area being used for non-required parking. That really was the main point of contention a few months ago. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I don't know that I have anything new to present on anything else.
Do you have some new layouts of the building to show, or, I mean, I'm not seeing anything that was provided that shows revised plans that are in line with the changes you're talking about. Am I missing something?
I'd be happy to pull up, I might ask Hanna or Jenah if they could help me pull up the application.
Yeah, so I have the combined submittals from November 18th, 2022.
Yeah, I pulled that one up, and I got one sheet online there, so I don't know. One page.
Yeah, first floor, second floor only, but that does show, and just to confirm, basically the car elevator location changed, right? So that
It did, yep. Excuse me.
and then just one floor of parking is removed. Is the parking floor that was removed, is that replaced with residential, or that parking part just gets one floor lower?
It was not replaced with residential per se. It just a floor within the amount of vertical space that we were sort of jamming 4 levels of parking in before. We now are fitting 3, and we were able to kind of reduce the height of that upper parking deck just slightly.
Got it. And then the residential component on the front is unchanged in essence, other than maybe some circulation connections.
That's correct. The part that faces Adams Street really didn't change, I don't think at all.
Thank you.
It's only one page.
Yeah, we only have, we have the other documents.
Yeah, this looks to be the new, yeah,
We're just need to share this.
okay. This one. Okay, I'll share the screen here for you. So still at the ground level is a little bit of apartment program. And ground level parking as you work your way up. Second floor automated parking system is shown on the left here. Third floor and fourth floor is largely the same. This is where previously we had third, fourth, and fifth floors. And this section might also help to clarify it. Previously, we were kind of trying to cram 4 levels of parking paired up with 3 levels of residential. Not only was that providing some heartburn in terms of the parking counts, but it also was making for a pretty complex structural system. So we've gone ahead and aligned the floor plates of the parking with the residential, and that allowed us to get a slightly lower height up through level 4.
And what's on the top there? What's that? Is leasing area? What's?
Correct. That's the leasing offices.
Oh, okay. Can you pan up a little bit to the? Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, how about just back to the plans real quick? Okay, stop on that one. Okay, next one. Okay, and can you zip to the last page there? I think that's what 1 and 2. Yeah.
Sorry, lower down in the building or?
Yeah, no, just right there where you've got it. Okay. Can I just see, go back to the east elevation, if you could. And so what are those, what is the material there for those panelized sections at the parking garage?
That is,
Yeah, that.
that is a wood tone composite cement board.
So it's a solid?
Yes.
Okay. is there a reason for not having some type of openings in there? I mean, the standpoint of ventilation or just,
Yeah, the automated parking system has little robots running around, so basically it needs to, it needs to be weather.
oh, so it's needs fully enclosed and it's doing some other type of ventilation
Yes,
that deals with, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's the questions I have for right now.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. Just as a brief synopsis of the staff report. First of all, there is a request in this application for approval for 5 years. Just to note that that's a non-standard condition. And then as conditioned, the applicant clearly meets applicable code sections. However, the staff has noted that the allowed uses has been being discussed, be an item for discussion. And as Mr. Weltzin already noted, 87A1 defines parking facility as the primary use of a site for parking vehicles. The term parking facility includes surface lots and garages. And that's the definition provided, the guidance by Garden City Code. With that, I don't think there's much more of a staff report, but we can stand for questions.
Jenna, but based on what's in the code, the interpretation of majority use is, I guess, the question, because there's nothing specifically in code that talks about that quantity or quantification.
That's correct. There's nothing in code that gives a quantity or quantification.
Okay, thanks.
And with that, we can open the public testimony. Just a first question. Mr. Chevrolet, did you intend to sign up for this application?
Okay.
Did you intend to sign up for this application
Sign up.
to testify?
Does it like that on, okay. There's just
You don't
one
wish
side
to
line.
testify.
Okay.
Hannah, do you mind
No, that's- you're-
muting some of the back chat?
Yeah, okay.
I think it's coming from Brett.
So if you don't wish to.
Sorry, Brett. I just saw SRG and
The other
BSD
one?
not muted.
Okay, because I was curious. All right. And then everybody else I have signed up is for this application. And so Mr. Martin Evans, would you like to testify?
Christopher would be testifying on mine.
All right. How about, and I saw somebody else may have put that, Jody Bennett. Do you wish to testify? Okay. All right. And then Roy Bennett. Okay, thank you. And then, well, that leaves us with Christopher and James. How about James?
My name is James Herbert, 404 East 40th Street. Before I start, I have a quick question regarding the leasing office. Is that just for the 404 building? It's not for 404 and Boardwalk, those offices? Is it strictly for the 4044 building?
At rebuttal, the applicant can respond at rebuttal. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sweet. All right. Thank you for your time and consideration. I have a number of concerns, questions, and suggestions for both the city and the developer. I'll start with the easiest. There are a number of mature shade and fruit trees along our shared property line with 4044 Adams. If any sort of project is approved, we would like the city to be involved with advising both us and the developer of what trees may or may not be removed. We ask the city to be involved as Mr. Talbot has been unwilling to communicate with us in regards to any shared infrastructure or landscaping on our shared property lines. The building's mass is excessive for the lot and the zoning. 61,000 square feet on a 20,000 square foot lot is absurd. It is only such a large building because of excessive parking. The same building with 16 apartments and the required amount of parking would be substantially smaller, approximately a third less mass. The proposed building currently holds enough square footage of parking to accommodate nearly 100 vehicles. Shifting the parking burden of a commercial property to a residential property results in an excessive building mass that creates a far greater impact on the surrounding community than properly housing the parking in the commercial development. This project is located on an R3 residential lot. As the developer is attempting to provide parking for usage above and beyond that of the residents and guests of the proposed building, the city must consider this project a parking garage. It must be adequately parked, but utilizing this residential property to fulfill a cross-parking arrangement with a commercial project, as well as providing additional unspecified non-resident parking, the city must view this as an unacceptable use of this property as defined in Garden City Code. Any parking other than that specifically required for residents and guests is a parking garage and should be seen as excessive and unacceptable. This property is located 0.3 miles from the Boardwalk condo building. Is this really the most appropriate location for parking for a commercial property? How many residents of high-end, high-rise condo buildings want to walk over a quarter mile to park their car? In the pre-app meeting and in response to my queries, the city has claimed not to take into consideration any usage that takes up less than 50% of the building's use. This is an incredibly dangerous and irresponsible view to take, as it opens the door for blatant misuse of residential zoning, as we see here in this proposal. If this is truly the city's on-the-record viewpoint, the committee and the city council will have no grounds to deny future projects that will take full advantage of this. This leaves the city with an inability to enforce any zoning use as long as it's sub 50%. Storage facilities, industrial use, lodging, RV park, tiny homes, homeless shelter. The city cannot claim to ignore usage for a parking garage, but attempt to enforce it in other areas. There is no difference between one prohibited use and another. If the city ignores this to push through this project, it will be directly detrimental to the city and its residents. The city and committee must operate with some semblance of consistency. The developer and architects of this project have used Boise City Code extensively to direct its parking requirements, as our parking code is found lacking in many areas. We must be consistent with the usage of Boise Code to address shortcomings and not allow developers to pick and choose when and where it is utilized. Our parking code does not have any verbiage on the maximum amount of parking required. That is not to say that it is open-ended or unlimited, only that the city has not addressed it. In developed sections of code, amounts that do not have limits are clearly identified as such. An example is building height in R3 is clearly specified to have no limit. Therefore, the maximums are not addressed. Therefore, the fact that maximums are not addressed simply means our code has not yet developed a maximum, and the appropriate means of handling this is the exact same as this developer used to calculate parking for the Boardwalk project, and how most elements of insufficient code are handled, by looking at Boise City Code. Boise happens to have a well-developed and well-implemented parking code that clearly states residential minimums and maximums. The city of Boise parking standards clearly state as follows. Parking standards 1-A-4, maximum parking. Off-street parking spaces shall not exceed 1.75 times the amount required in table 1 if the required number is 20 or less, and 1.5 times the amount where 20 or more are required. It is totally responsible for the city to allow a developer to utilize Boise code when it suits its purpose and completely ignore it when it doesn't. This is a clear case of undeveloped coding, and the correct means of dealing with this was very clearly stated by Hanna Veal during the 8/16/21 design review meeting in regards to parking. I quote, "Since Garden City Code does not specify parking minimums or maximums, the planning office defers to the city of Boise." This is a time to do exactly such, and operating with a reasonable level of consistency is incredibly important for our city and its residents. This property is not an acceptable zoning or location to execute a cross-parking agreement, nor is it the location under which the boardwalk project was approved for. The cross-parking agreement was approved for 520 East 40th Street, and although this is also a residential property, we ask that all parking requirements and statements of intent that were in place at the time of the approval be maintained, both to uphold goodwill towards those who fought and appealed the development over parking, and to prevent developers from requiring less costly residential properties and using them to fulfill the required parking for a commercial property. During the reconsideration of the appeal, the developer stated, "We intend to execute a cross-parking agreement for 44 spaces to be located at 520 East 40th Street." A cross-parking agreement is not required for this project. It was requested by the developer in lieu of providing adequate parking on site. Using this requirement of a cross-parking agreement as an argument for overparking a residential property is not a valid reason. Nor does a cross-parking agreement supersede zoning code, which states a parking garage is not an allowable use. A parking garage on a residential lot surrounded by residences is not an acceptable reason for a rezone. Wanting to see an automated parking garage, as some members of this community really want to see, is not a valid reason for approval, nor is providing excessive parking due to the efficiency of such a system. The appropriate place for both the parking and the automated garage is within the boardwalk buildings, where residents of that project can actually use them. This project is directly detrimental to the health, well-being, and property values of surrounding properties. Who wants to live next to a parking garage on a residential street? There's cause for concern with excessive amounts of fumes, pollution, carbon monoxide, noise, and traffic in an area that would have none of these without this project. The lack of consideration for the current residents of Garden City and their well-being by this committee and the city council is absolutely appalling. Would any of you honestly want this project to be built on the residential property next to you? Finally, as you all know, the boardwalk project was appealed in all forms over lack of parking. Many residents spent their hard-earned time and money in order to appeal and express concerns over the lack of on-site parking provided by this developer, which is why it is a kick to the face and totally insulting to both the city and those who expressed concern when in the pre-application meeting for this project, Mr. Chad Weltzin clearly stated on the record that the development does not have enough parking. As the developer argued that the project was not only adequately parked, but in fact overparked, and Mr. Talbot claimed that the parking was master planned in order to get the project approved, it should be considered that the information the project was approved upon was insufficient, misleading, inaccurate, or incomplete. Whether intentional or not, it is hard to stomach that a master plan project that was fought and appealed on exactly that basis would be deficient enough in parking to attempt to justify building a parking garage on a residential property. How, when the project hasn't reached any stage of completion, can a developer state that despite the fact they claim the project to be so well parked in order to obtain approval, can they come back less than a year later and claim it to be underparked? The boardwalk project will be built, but it is essential for the future of our city to ensure that the largest development of our city is built properly based upon correct and sufficient information and does not leave us in a debacle that cannot be reversed. Therefore, the correct and appropriate means of action according to Idaho State Municipal Code 54-4311 is to revoke the approval and the permit of the Boardwalk condo tower and allow the developer to come back to the table with a reasonable and correct parking plan. The super cool automated garage should be located in the Boardwalk tower. They have 1.26 acres of commercial property and can add a few stories without any discernible difference to the building's mass, instead of overdeveloping and excessively overparking a 0.45 acre residential lot over a quarter of a mile from the development. Let's do this right, not hastily, and based upon obviously misleading information. This is a very important stage of growth for our city, and it will set an example for development and developers for years to come. We as a city cannot allow developers to misuse our code, gain approvals based on inaccurate or misleading information, or leave our city in a place where there's no parking for access of the greenbelt or any of the facilities that this development claims to provide. Thank you for considering these issues and for making the appropriate decision for this city's future and its current and future residences. I have a copy of my testimony. I'd like to give it to you to add to public record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Herbert, before you sit down.
Yes.
Are there any questions for Mr. Herbert?
I do not have any.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Christopher Herbert.
Good evening. My name is Christopher Herbert, and I'm a property owner at 404 East 40th Street. My property is adjacent to the 4044 North Adams Street property and shares the property line. Zoning for 4044 North Adams Street is R3 medium density residential. Project plans for 6 stories, 61,474 square foot building with 16 residential units, 11 one-bedroom apartments, 5 two-bedroom apartments, making up 30,189 square foot of dwelling units. The remaining 31,285 square feet consist of vehicle parking spread over 4 floors, including 2 vehicle elevators, and has a total of 75 parking spaces. The required parking spaces to satisfy requirements for the proposed residence at 4044 North Adams is 29, leaving it in excess of parking by 46 spaces. I'd like you to refer to Garden City Municipal Code 8-2B-2, allowed uses, where in table 8-2B-1 you find listed all permitted, conditional, and prohibited uses. It is clearly read in code for R3 zoning that a parking facility is a prohibited use. In addition, under 8-2B-2, section B, number 4, code states the proposed use is consistent with the purpose of the district in which the use is proposed to be located. In the same section, letter D of code states, for uses that may fall into more than one category, the planning officials shall determine the most appropriate category based on the more restrictive standards. Finally, in Article 8-4D-4 parking use standards, letter A, number of spaces, it states no use shall provide less than the minimum or more than the maximum number of off-street parking spaces required. In the pre-application meeting, Chad Weltzin, on behalf of the developer, tried to pretend this wasn't a parking facility, while also arguing the point that this facility is needed to fulfill a cross-parking agreement for the commercially zoned boardwalk development. Cross-parking agreement Chad was referring to is made for a different property located at 520 East 40th Street. This cross-parking agreement was used to get reconsideration of a denied application for the 18-story condominium portion of the boardwalk project. To remind you all, the decision to approve the boardwalk was appealed by the public after approval from design review and city council, where the application was then denied on the grounds of inadequate parking, among other things. The developer went on to seek reconsideration of the decision, and during the meeting on 12/13/20 2021 was quoted saying, "We intend to execute a cross parking agreement for 44 spaces to be located at 520 East 40th Street." This testimony was used to gain approval for this part of the project. At the time of this approval, the property at 4044 North Adams Street was not yet owned by the developer, nor was it mentioned. So my questions for the development team are simple, and I'd like straightforward answers in reply. You have 75 parking spaces, 29 of which for the residents at 4044 Adams Street. Is it your intention to use 14 of the remaining spots to satisfy a cross parking agreement that was made on a different property? Second question would be, what is the intended use of the remaining parking spaces that were left unlabeled that are part of this project at 4044 North Adams Street? And then the third question is, please explain how this does not constitute a parking facility when it is the majority of the square footage, 4 floors of parking spaces totaling 75, 2 car elevators, a vast surplus of parking that will be used to fulfill a deficit on adjacent commercial developments, as well as to satisfy a cross parking agreement for the boardwalk development. In addition, I would also ask for some clarity from the design review committee by asking them a few questions. In the pre-application meeting, it was acknowledged by the design review that this was indeed a parking facility. During the same meeting, Derek Hurd made comments that I would like some clarification on, so as to be very clear of what you consider allowable in zoning law and code. He made a statement to the developer that as long as more than 50% of the structure was going towards dwelling units, they'd be okay with approving this. So my questions are this. Is it the design review and the city's position that all prohibited uses in our zoning code are acceptable so long as they make up less than 50% of the building? Second question is there some other measurement or criteria by which a prohibited use may be allowed by code? My third question is, if you approve this application, are you willing to go on record saying that you are objectively judging this application and you do not consider this building to be a parking facility for use by the greater boardwalk development? In closing, I'd like to say that allowing this application to pass would represent an intentional misinterpretation of city code and zoning laws. The parcel at 4044 Adams Street is an R3 zone property, and at no point until now has it been part of any plans for parking the inadequately parked commercial development called the boardwalk. The community fought against the boardwalk development on these grounds, and you approved it anyway. To now allow the developer to build a parking facility on a residentially zoned property where it is prohibited, instead of insisting they take care of the parking needs within the development space of the boardwalk, be an insult, injustice, and disservice to all citizens of Garden City. I believe the developers building and architectural teams fully understand these zoning laws, and the developers being intentionally deceitful and bringing such plans before you to be passed. Remind you that you are here to represent all of the taxpaying citizens of this city. And if the developer cannot fulfill the requirements from previous applications to satisfy their parking needs for the boardwalk development, maybe the city should rethink its approval of that plan instead of moving forward a plan that clearly goes against code. Thank you. And I also would like to provide a copy of my testimony to be put on the record. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Mr. Herbert? Is there anybody either online or in person who wishes to provide testimony who hasn't? If you're online and wish to provide testimony, please speak up. All right. Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public testimony portion and turn it back over, or before I do that, let's turn it back over to the applicant for rebuttal.
Thanks, Hannah. I'll try to address a few things, and then I think Mr. Talbot would like to speak as well. A lot of comments there, a lot to address. I'm sure we won't be able to hit on everything that was mentioned, but I guess to address a few things. There was a concern about sort of in a blanket way, looking at any disallowed use as being okay as long as it's less than 50%. This is not what this is, because parking in itself is already a supplemental use to any use. We're just debating the quantity of it. Code has no similar means of talking about the predominant use of a site for selling alcohol or something. It's either it is or it isn't. So parking is already kind of in its own category of, it's always allowed on every site. It's just a matter of how much. So looking at it under those confines, I have to go back to some of the facts. The code does not state a maximum. We understand there was concern with the initial application that it just felt too out of proportion. So we dialed it way back to the point where both the number of space on a per space count as well as a floor area count, we're now well under 50%. So I don't know how that can be claimed to be excessive. I want to clarify a few things as far as the parking of the different projects, because I think some things are getting confused. The condo tower was approved and agreed to have on its site sufficient parking for its use. That was agreed to during our DR modification a year ago. At one point during the initial comprehensive boardwalk DR application, at one point, the owner was under contract for the property at 520, I think it is, East 40th. And at one point, the intention was to park a certain number of cars on that lot. That contract fell through and that was pulled out of our application. So again, looking at the records, in the end, for the boardwalk design review approval, a condition of approval just states that we are required to have 14 offsite, cross-park agreement for 14 offsite spaces. So the whole thing about there being 44 on another lot, that was kind of from an old record, unless I'm really mistaken my memory here. So as of now, we are required to have an offsite parking agreement for 14 spaces. That's something we have to solve on our own. And the only additional land that the client has been able to procure is this site, and it works perfectly because it's contiguous with the rest of our development. So that explains why this is the perfect spot for us to solve that requirement. I thought, Mike, would you like to say a few words?
Good afternoon, Mike Talbot, VIII Properties, 1743 Bannock, box 7143. Ms. Veal, Ms. Thornborrow, and appointed members. I don't think it's appropriate to air all this laundry about previously approved projects that are already approved and permitted. I get the fact that these folks from the beginning have not been happy with anything we've done over there. Be that as it may, we are trying to listen to their issues. We've dropped the floor of parking. We've changed various designs and suggestions to the property to try and complement. But we're still within the box of the code in the city. As far as discussing trees, you guys are welcome at any time to come over and talk to us. We're there every day, been there every day. And to my knowledge, no one's ever asked us about any trees. And if so, come over and we'll talk about it. If there are trees, and we had an arborist review those, pretty much the lion's share of trees on that property are dead or diseased. So we're removing what's on our property that is dead or diseased. But if there's a discussion to be had, please come over and chat with us. So we aren't unwilling to talk. Anytime, come on over. And that isn't funny. That's a sincere statement, even though you may not take it as such. We're airing laundry about cross-park agreements for 44 cars, and the fact of the matter was 14. we have a mixed use development, not a commercial development next door. The boardwalk is a mixed use residential commercial. And in that, we are fully parked and we've met the parking conditions. But we did have a promise to the city to fulfill a cross park agreement. It wasn't required to be on just 520 41st Street. We had within, I think, a radius of a quarter mile or a mile within the location of the property to meet that condition. We think it's the perfect location because quite frankly, as the parking code is going to be amended maybe someday soon, the cross park agreement is a difficult thing to comply with. No property owner probably would want to commit to a permanent agreement to park any cars on their property that would appeal them from having the ability to sell that land at some point to someone else. It's clear what's going on in Garden City near the river is a redevelopment zone. There's developments everywhere going on, and it's a gentrification of the city. It's clear some will be happy, some will not. I get that as well. We're just on the side of the development. We are developing what we see as an opportunity to remodel the city and provide a new business. We are not doing anything, and that's why we go through the system. You folks have reviewed our code compliant request. This is not a prohibited use to the site. And we've spent a lot of time with all the different agencies to make sure we are in compliance with the code. As far as the parking facility, which is not a true defined word in the code, but we are trying to extrapolate what that really means. We heard Mr. Labrie talk about it and talked about he used the word metric, and it's saying anything over 51% really seems to be a little onerous. And I think once again, as we did, and that's you guys on the property at 408, we've lowered a floor, we've reduced parking, and we've tried to listen to the comments and try and stay within the code. Hence, excuse me. Hence, we don't have a limit to height, and there is no limit to parking. So I think we've done a good mix of all those conditions. And I think the building is a beautiful building. You're going to see this all up and down Adams. You're going to see it all up and down the river. It is coming. It is here. And it's unfortunate we can't all see the same through the same prism. As far as the cross park, though, it is a part of how we supplement our promise to the city. And short of that, I'm not sure in this climate with the price of land, you could find it anywhere else. I don't think we need to discuss the tower or the boardwalk apartments. It's just taking up airtime. So those would be my comments, supplemented with Mr. Weltzin, who I will correct one thing that was stated, that he admitted that I believe you said this project was underparked. I think it was this project. I wasn't clear, but there is no project that we have proposed or have been permitted that is underparked. We are properly parked, but we're not getting forward with it. So having said that, if there's any further questions for Mr. Weltzin or I, obviously we're here to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant team?
I don't have any.
Thank you. Seeing none, now I will formally close the public testimony and turn it over to the committee for discussion.
Well, I guess I'll get in here with some discussion and thoughts. My recollection of what, you know, the discussion that we had on the pre-application wasn't that it was set that it's a square footage thing, and as long as the square footage come back, it's a percentage. It's a quantity that pushes this to be predominantly or majority wise one use versus another. And I don't know that we ever actually settled on or in my mind that, oh, it's this quantifies it. This is the equation that, gosh, if it meets this. I think there was some discussion around, oh, what is that? What actually is the, how do you quantify that? How do you come to some kind of a concrete
Right.
way to look at this? And, I think it plays into a bunch of different aspects. Okay. As I'm sitting here thinking about this and looking and kind of hearing the discussion, if you want to look at, okay, maybe it's one of the things you can look at is quantity of parking. Okay, if there's a percentage of parking, there's a number of parking that is stalls that are required for this building and this use. Okay, so you add a bunch more stalls to that are, that put this to be the required parking is only 30 some odd % of what's being proposed. Okay, so when you look at that, does that push this to the majority of this use here is that parking aspect because it exceeds that. Okay, well, so there's that aspect of number of stalls, square footage of stalls, square footage of building area, whatever, those that kind of a quantity. And then you look at, well, what's the vehicular pedestrian traffic impact that this has? Does it have a greater impact on this location contextually in, with that parking function than the residential function? And is that something that should be considered to say, or help to determine whether this is more like a parking structure in its impact and function than it is the residential piece? I think there's that part of it too. And then there's the, which is in our purview, the aesthetic of this. And does it look more like one or the other in its amount of exterior fenestrations, amount of, solid elements versus open and articulated elements or what have you? I mean, so does it move more towards, feels more like a residential building and how the facade is articulated because residential use lends itself to certain things that you can do with the exterior of the building versus a parking structure, a parking facility, and so on and so forth. I think there's so many of these different aspects that I feel that should be considered, should be thought about. The code isn't specific on how you get there with what constitutes a majority. I just don't feel comfortable that I can make a decision that, oh yeah, no, this, because the code's not specific on it, I can interpret it this way. I just think there's too many factors at play here in my mind of that should be considered and probably should be clarified potentially in the code if that's left to be interpreted. I have a hard time just feeling like it's one thing that I can feel like I can make a decision, that this is actually falls into that yeah, it's an acceptable use because it meets this criteria. Therefore, let's review it based on that it is acceptable here. And so I mean, that's to open the discussion anyways.
Sure. No, I think those are good thoughts. I kind of have to look at it as what is in the code, what is code saying, and start to remove the feelings of it, right? Because feelings aren't objective, but primary use is objective. And the discussion we had in the previous meeting about primary use was, what is primary, because that's not defined. Parking facility is defined, and that's, you know, the primary use being to park cars, right? So then in all these instances where we're focusing on one word, you know, the city attorney says, go define that word. And primary is the word in this case, and primary means, you know, first and foremost, majority, etc. Right? And so that's where that conversation was, that one of the members of the public testified to, you know, talking about primary being 50%. That's where that kind of discussion came from. So if we're just looking at things that are objective, is this a parking garage? Is the primary use of this site a parking garage? I have to say, no, it's not. And that's not just because it's 51% residential, it's substantially now more for the parking is for the use of the structure itself and the residences themselves and the, you know, the other applications that are going on within this building. So I can't look at this building and say it's a parking garage. I can look at this building and say it has more than the minimum, which is what typically projects have less than the minimum. And then the neighbors come and complain that there's not enough parking. And this has more than the minimum. So now the neighbors come and complain that there's too much parking. So it's kind of, it's ironic in that sense. But the other thing that is clear in the code is that there is no maximum amount of parking. So there's no trigger that says this is required to be X number of spots. And if it's X plus 30, it's not allowed in code. So, you know, there's no stop to that in the same way there's no stop to height in this zone. We can't say, well, it feels too tall because the neighbors are only 2 stories. There's no code limit. So there's no code limit for the number of parking. So we can't look at it as numbers. It has to trigger it to be the primary use. And in, you know, in how I look at it, I don't see this as being primarily a parking garage. And then there was some discussion about, you know, the concern that everything that was triggered over 51% would be, you know, allowing us to put a, you know, any sort of facility in any other sort of facility if it wasn't the primary use. And that's just simply not the way that the definitions of the uses and codes work. Each one of the uses and codes is addressed as the use of the site for something. It just happens to be that parking talks about the primary use because every use requires parking and every use has parking. So it has the differentiator of being triggered when it becomes the primary use. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And then I think, you know, the fact that it went from the number of parking spots it had in the initial application, and then we removed an entire floor of parking, and you know, the building is the same architecturally and it reads the same architecturally from the street, and it still reads as a residential project from the street, from the public right of way. You know, it doesn't look less like a parking garage or more like a parking garage. It still looks like a residential project from the street.
I guess I understand a little bit on the argument of, okay, there's not a maximum amount of parking defined in the code. I agree with that if all this parking is for this building. The fact that the parking is being provided for not the occupants of this building, the excessive parking, and that we've got this chunk, or let's say 2.5 times more parking that is there intended for not people that are living in this building. That to me, I mean, that aspect is I guess puts another little interpretation on, again, in my mind, what's the use of this, the function of this? Is there going to be more vehicular traffic in and out of this building associated with a exterior parking function for another site, rather than the amount of traffic that's going to be utilized for this building? I mean, those are quantifiable things that I think are not, it's not a subjective interpretation. It's looking at, okay, trips to and from the building. It's objective on, what's the majority of the building functionality being utilized for.
Right.
So I guess I'm having a hard time thinking that it's just one thing. I think there's a few different objective things that can be looked at here associated with trying to determine or come to some kind of conclusion on a majority use of the building. And I don't feel that I want to make that decision.
Right. And so in the staff report, I'm reading, the only remaining yellow highlighted part in the staff report.
That's where I'm falling on this.
So 76% of the total is residential and it's parking, and 24% of the total is other parking.
Yeah, I'm 76. I got there's 75 stalls, there's 29 required
square footage.
Oh, and I'm talking about number of, at this point, I'm talking about number of stalls. I mean, I guess you could look at square footage of building, but, and then, so that's one quantity measure. You can also look at number of stalls. What's required, what's been provided.
Let's write those down and review that math. Number of stalls.
Number of stalls. So from the what's here in the staff report, indicating that number of stalls required are 29. I believe that's what it said here.
Are you on 4D-5?
Yeah, let me see. Let me get there.
Yeah. 29.
Yeah. So number of vehicular parking spaces required 29. Total provided 75. So you look at that math and the number required is like about 39% of the total provided. Now again, you're talking about, okay, so that many's required, you can do more than that. And I guess therein is my argument of, well, if it's for this building, then it doesn't matter. Yeah, you could do more of that, but it's not. It's not.
But we're
providing 2 stalls per unit or 2.5 per. I mean, it's not that's not the way it's presented.
Right. But you're trying to get to a trigger of the primary use of the site being a parking garage. And so you have to look at it, as a whole. You can't say the primary, the majority of the parking provided is for something other than the site, therefore it's a parking facility. A parking facility is defined as the primary use of a site for parking vehicles. The primary use of a site for parking vehicles, is it that or is it not? I say it is not. And I
I
agree.
guess
If there's, if
it
there's 75,
pushes on that enough to where, in my mind, it's not that, it's not that clear. That the dominant component of this is the residential component. Or it's just not that cut and dry. That I guess I feel that
so they could add 75 residential units and add 75 parking spots for the units on site. And then the extra spaces would just be like a quarter of the parking provided, and then it would certainly not be a parking garage. So just make it 17 stories with extra part. I mean, you're laughing. but
no, I
the math
understand
is
what you're
true.
saying. I understand what you're saying. I think that there's other issues that come into play with that as well, but
Committee.
yes,
The applicant has indicated that he believes he has some facts that may help the discussion. The public testimony has been closed, but we could reopen it if you wish to hear that.
I like facts.
Okay.
sure.
Mr. Talbot.
Thanks for the ability to supplement some of the facts. Real quickly, I think you said on something very clearly. The code talks about parking requirements for the number of units we have, which defines your minimum parking. But there is no definition, as I think you've been going toward, that there is no maximum. I want to be clear that the 14 cross park is an obligation we made to the city, and this is how we supplement that. But that's the only part that crosses over to Boardwalk. The rest of the parking we're supplying here would be for additional parking for the property and the project. The design, I think we're being a little punitive if we're using a very expensive design, high density mechanical parking system that gives us the ability to increase some of the stalls. It doesn't change the size of the building. If we came in and removed 20 stalls, the building would look no different. But because we are so able to mechanize and efficiently park, we're able to add those. And I think everybody knows that we're going toward the need for more car parking than less. As far as a noise or a fume standpoint that one of the public hearing folks that spoke about, these cars park at the very bottom and they turned off. Then they put into like a Tetris system and lifts them up and puts them away. They aren't running their engines up on the second floor, third floor, or fourth floor. So noise and gas and fumes are not even considered in this kind of a concept. So it's I think a very efficient and not as economical, but it's a very efficient way to get additional parking to satisfy what I think is a code that really doesn't park properly anyway. But, you know, the code is what it is. And I know we're working on trying to modify that within the city. But until we get there, this is one of our ideas of how to mitigate that. But I did want to make it clear that we're not putting extra parking stalls here so they can go park and go down the street or go across the street or go over to the boardwalk or live somewhere else. This is going to be parking for the Adams Street project. And again, emphasizing that the real estate version of this, we took the lead from Brett when you talked about that we were significantly less in real estate. We thought if you take the stalls and the number of acreages or square footage of the buildings that's required for the public parking and the required parking, we're well above 60-70% of the building. To Derek's point, that we're more of an apartment building than a parking structure. And that the actual allocation for the real estate that's used for this additional parking, which isn't against code, it's just kind of going above and beyond minimum code, is 16%. So I thought those facts might be of help to you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
So then that I think that the summary of that is 75 spots provided, 29 required. I'm not going to do the math on the spot, but 14, it's 14 extra ones. We can take 14 spots and say that is the little parking garage component, because they've overparked the apartment complex, which they're entitled to do to any degree that they want to. And then there's 14 spots that are another function from another site coming here and being this little parking garage. And the question in code is, does that constitute this being a parking facility?
I think that if that's the case and there's somehow something's in there that identifies that, hey, look, there's only 14 stalls here. They're going to be part of any kind of cross parking agreement, access, what have you, to another site off that's not part of this property. Then I guess that in my mind starts to solidify that, okay, the majority of this building then is not being used as a parking structure, as it's not intended to have, just without kind of touching on that piece, looking at 29 stalls and then the remainder of those is this off-site parking going on and traffic and the rest of the impact associated with that, then it kind of doesn't really solidify the fact that this is only a minor function of the building that's happening here, where it's not parking the actual residents of the building or uses in the building. So that does help.
And then as a whole, because you had a couple thoughts on, required number of spots and impact to the neighborhood, and then the visual appeal and the look. And to me, I think this, to include parking within a building and have it still look architecturally, I mean, there's solid void, there's multi-materials from the front, it's as minimal of a impact to the street as any project that includes parking within it that I think we've seen. Is there anything that we need to address or look at?
No, I think that is a factor that goes into it, but after kind of having the applicant scroll back and forth with the exterior elevations, the one that's on the screen, and kind of just looking at how some of those perimeter functions on the at the lower level, the second floor, kind of wrap around the parkings and, allowing for some opportunities, the two-story element on the top with those functions and the fenestrations associated with that. I think that losing that one additional story of parking and bringing that solid component that wraps around the rest of the building kind of down and in check has really helped with that aspect of it. And from the street front, yeah, it feels outside of, there's a very large parking entrance as a portion of that street facade, but the remainder of the facade is it's apartments, it's dwelling units. So I think from that standpoint of what's exposed and the perception at the street frontage, it falls more in line with the feeling, because of that parking enclosed and tucked in and automated, allows for it to not look as much on the exterior as a parking garage, which is a traditional parking garage anyways.
Yeah,
That also helps.
Yeah, I think the fact that to get the included parking within the project, within the building, the automation really helps it read as, more pleasing architecturally, because we don't have, floor plates that are ramps. So it kind of harmonizes better in the neighborhood.
And then the date now, going to get into this.
So I don't know that, and I don't know that I have anything else. I don't know if staff has any other comments, or we entertain a motion.
If there are no other discussion items, certainly we could entertain a motion.
Do you have a motion you want to bring to the table, Derek?
Yeah, I would move to approve DSR FY 2022-0019 as presented in the staff report.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, thank you.
Thanks.
And then there is a person here that I believe is understanding that the 14, that just to verify that the committee's not understanding that there's a difference of 14, but the 14 is intended for a cross park. And that's where the number 14 comes from. I just want to make sure that you understand that.
There needs to be additional. Down 14.
So that I do believe they understood that.
My understanding from the applicant and from what our discussion here is that there's 14 stalls here that are going to be subject to cross park access or agreement.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We do appreciate everybody's time in coming out today, the public and the applicants, as well as the committees. And with that, we'll move on to the next item, the next hearing, which is design review fiscal year 2022, number 23. Jorre Delgado is requesting a new construction of a multifamily structure located at 306 East 46th Street. Jorre, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Are you guys able to let me share my screen?
You bet.
Are you guys able to see this?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Jorre Delgado. My address is 421 East Trackstand Lane in Garden City. I'm here to present Silver Bucket located at 306 East 46th Street in Garden City. It is 17 units. We have 3 different buildings. We have duplex buildings, 3-plex, and a 5-plex. And based on our pre-application, we made a couple changes to the site. We added a pedestrian walkway that connects from 46th Street back to the 47th Street development along the side of our development, along with a more usable open space between the 2 properties. We also flipped our duplex buildings per your guys' request so that the stairs weren't on 46th Street. Our 46th Street front now has more of an artwork mural on it, along with more of a landscape buffer and some pedestrian walkways, some little stepping stones, more of a community garden area, but to take away so that you weren't just looking at stairs in the front. And our open space now is all along the back and the sides. And then when we flipped the duplex buildings, we also were able to gain some more open space for those front units to utilize behind them. And then also we changed up the garage doors per your guys' request as well, so that it wasn't just looking down and looking kind of blank, as well as, let me try to find. As well as the threeplex building, which is at the very back of our property that you're looking down into. We added a mural artwork that matches the front facing 46th Street along the whole front of that building. And I'm open for comments and questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Delgado?
Yeah, do we not have any kind of direct connectivity from the those first two units to the street? I mean,
Right now, we do not. Because we flipped it and now their stairwell is actually where their parking is. So let me grab the link.
Yeah, I thought we were, you know, that was part of the comment was kind of that relationship to the street, I believe. I just wanted to clarify. We don't have to get into it now. We can kind of finish and move on with the public testimony if there is any. I want to come back to that though.
But while you're on this plan too, what connects the street to the bottom of page units, let's call it south? How do we get to those doors?
So these doors are next to their parking spaces, right?
The next fiveplex in.
Yeah.
So they have garages, they each have their own garages and they have front doors in each of these little spaces with a landscape area.
So walking from the street to front door.
They have a sidewalk right there.
Okay,
They have a
but
garage entrance and a sidewalk entrance with these awnings and their front doors set back in those.
but that the lefternmost one is not connected to the street.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right.
No more questions.
Sounds like we might be ready for a staff report.
All right, good afternoon. This is design review fiscal year 2022-0023. And it's a 17-unit multifamily residential development project. As a multifamily development, the project needs to provide different amenities, and the number of amenities that is required of a multifamily development is dependent on how many dwelling units are provided within that project. This project consists of 20 or less units, which is a category that requires two amenities from two separate categories within that amenity section of code. So what the application has provided is that they've provided quality of life amenity, which is public art that is visible or otherwise usable from to the public. But there are two other categories, open space and recreation amenities, that they need to provide, and it's not quite clear within the submittal documents if it has been provided or not. A Fairview Acres open irrigation ditch runs along the northern property boundary line. There is also a Davis Drain open ditch running perpendicular to the other side of the canal, which is bisecting the lot, similar to where you see the hammerhead locations. The applicant has identified that they do intend to pipe the irrigation canals, but the city requires that all irrigation ditches, laterals, or canals and drains shall be left open and used as a water amenity or a linear open space. That is, unless it can be reasonably demonstrated to the design review committee that the maintenance of the irrigation ditch encumbers more than 50% of the property. The irrigation ditch is located on the property in such a way that it is infeasible or makes the property infeasible. Or thirdly, the irrigation ditch is enclosed on both sides adjacent to this property, and the adjacent properties are fully developed in a manner that future openings of the enclosed irrigation ditch is not feasible. The property does propose, like I said, it does propose to tile the irrigation ditches. But the reason behind that is to, one, have the common drive there for access to the property as it does run perpendicular internal to the development. And then the second irrigation ditch along the, I'll call it the northern property boundary line, is proposed to be tiled to allow for that pedestrian and bicycle access that was discussed at the pre-application level. And moving on to the architectural features of the proposed buildings, the architectural features of the rear facing facades, such as the windows and the patios, should consider that the adjacent properties are zoned R3, and they are currently low density in nature and have single family dwelling units within them. The adjacent property of 233 and 311 East 47th Street is proposing 3-story townhome styled multifamily units. And the 3-plex units of this application will face an 8-plex unit on the adjacent proposal. This was also discussed at the design review pre-application meeting. It was also discussed at the pre-application meeting that pedestrian level elements such as glazing on the facades appears to be lacking. Design components to enhance the 3-story street facing facade, such as architectural protrusions or fenestrations, to create a more dynamic and interesting frontage are lacking. Also noted at the pre-application meeting is that the front facade of the duplexes act primarily as a stairwell for the 2 units. Secondarily, and likely the main reason as to why the facade appears blank is because of the other portion of the area is dedicated to pantry space according to the floor plans submitted. And the applicant has addressed these comments from the pre-application by adding artwork or mural work along the facade. Artwork was also added to address the terminal view comments that were made at the pre-application meeting. So it will need to be discussed as to if the artwork along the facades meet what code requires of the terminal view. And then moving on to parking, the site is deficient 2 parking spaces, specifically the 2 guest parking spaces required of the application. The application has not requested alternatives for parking or alternatives to parking code standards such as bicycle, public transportation, shared parking, etc. And so the project requires 39 parking spaces total, and it only provides 37 parking spaces. And looking at the most recent resubmittals, the proposal is not clear if the sidewalk is attached or detached. The plans appear to have an attached sidewalk, whereas the submittal documents received on November 20th, 2022 note that the sidewalk is detached. So just as a clarification, code does require that there be a 5-foot wide detached sidewalk with a 6 or 8-foot landscape buffer to allow for the required street trees. And ACHD's comments encourage a treatment consistent with that of city's code. So the frontage of 46th Street is required to have 3 class 2 trees. However, the plans show that there are 5 frontage trees, but they are proposed back of sidewalk. So as the sidewalk is required to be detached, at least 3 of the 5 proposed trees will be required within the landscape buffer between 46th Street and the sidewalk. Additionally, the site lacks the code required trees. 31 trees are required, whereas 20 trees are provided in total. And additionally, perimeter landscaping is required along the northwest and the southern property boundary lines. Landscape plans show that the west and the south provide that perimeter landscaping. However, the northern property boundary line does not have perimeter landscaping because of that pedestrian connection that was discussed at the pre-application hearing. And then lastly, as far as landscaping goes, an arborist report with the tree caliper mitigation numbers has not been submitted. So it is possible that there will be a required or more caliper inches required of the site. So instead of the 30 trees being or 31 trees being required, it might be that there would be more trees required. But that has been conditioned in the decision document to require the tree mitigation. So the plans are relatively silent on what is considered private open space and what is considered common open space. Additionally, not all of the dimensions are identified in the site plan. And so staff has not been able to determine the open space or if what is shown in the plans is qualifying as common open space. So there just has not been enough information to review at this point in time. With that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I don't have any.
Thank you. Peter, I'll open the Shipper. We're opening the public testimony and Peter Eric Shipper. If you wouldn't mind joining us at the podium and stating your name and address for the record.
Okay, my name is Peter Eric Shiverick. I go by Eric. My address is 4673 Northwind Court, Garden City. I'm at a total loss here. I haven't been to one of these since 1994. I guess that this is called the design review. When is the meeting to decide whether this property is even going to be built upon?
Well, to answer that question, design review is for the design and the multifamily is a permitted use on the site.
Wow, okay. I honestly, I don't even know what to say. So it's just going through. It's a done deal.
If you wouldn't mind asking questions and then we can respond at the end if there are other items to address.
I'm sorry, what?
The format of the meeting is, it's not intended to be a back and forth. It's, if you have questions, feel free to answer and either the applicant or staff can
Okay,
answer.
May I address the folks who had planned to be here, but were not able to make it? And all of these these people have legitimate reasons that they were not able to write in. But they wanted to be here.
You can certainly submit that for the record.
Okay, so do you need to know do you want me to say their names and addresses for the record? Okay, so Matt Schwartz, 4650 Northwind Court, Dave Cuthbert, 4665,
Joseph Slanik, 4677, Kathy Gary, 4680, Melody Hodges, 4673, Sandra Stoddard, 4657, Thomas Villanora is 4661, and Tim and Connie Spanbauer is 4653. These people take up half of our entire street, and they're clueless as to this also, I guess. Like I said, they had planned on being here. 3 of these folks are in the hospital right now. The others couldn't make it due to work. And this thing, I had no idea. I'm not a computer guy, so I don't know if this is out online to even look at. This is huge. Okay, I guess that I'm supposed to ask questions. Okay, I've got lists of concerns. One person asked, what environmental studies on impacts for wildlife? This area does have the ditch that goes through. There are also trees that are going to be torn out, obviously. So that's going to affect wildlife there. What is this doing as far as the natural resources, the water, and then also the water? What is the sewage produce going to be? What is the garbage produce going to be? Noise pollution. Is there a parking garage? I'm not seeing a parking garage. Another concern that someone had is the new e-bikes. Is there going to be parking for these? Because it seems everyone thinks that they need a car and an e-bike, and some of these things take up a lot of space. And then someone else asked about the schools, the buses, that this is going to, obviously, if we're bringing this many people in, we're going to have more schools, more buses, emergency, police, fire, paramedics, and the highway department. How are these roads going to take care of this many people? The population increase. I don't know what else. I don't know how else to say what I'm saying, but we have a lot of questions, and this thing seems like it just jumped.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Shiverick? All right, thank you. Is there anybody else, either in person or online, who wishes to provide testimony? All right, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Delgado.
Thank you, Jenna. I just wanted to note that we do have our property posting sign posted on the site with my direct number, and I have not been contacted by anybody. I'd be happy to discuss issues and concerns, but to date, I haven't been contacted by anybody, so I'm not exactly sure how to address all of those comments right now, maybe at a later date once I'm contacted, but for now, I'm open for questions.
I may provide some response to Mr. Shiverick on some of the questions. As already noted, every zoning district has either permitted, conditionally permitted, or prohibited uses. And this application is a multifamily, which is a permitted use within that zoning district. The applicant will be required to provide tree mitigation information, as well as the city requires an ability to serve letter, which is the city engineer reviewing the application to ensure that there is adequate capacity in the water and sewer system to be able to serve the project, as well as we also send out to other agencies such as the highway district, et cetera, further review that's included into the record documents. And I guess those are my responses to your comments. And seeing no other public testimony, Ms. Delgado already provided the rebuttal, we can close the public testimony and turn it over to discussion with the committee.
right. I guess I'll get us started with discussion. I've got a number of items here that I feel that this, as proposed, this project kind of falls short on the definitely on the street frontage. In addition to the detached sidewalk that is in the staff report, the how those front two units, the presence on the street, and how they address the street isn't it hasn't been accomplished. But even just as important to that is the pedestrian access and circulation through the site. And I think it's the current arrangement is very problematic in that, you know, this pedestrian spine or pathway that hugs tight and passes in front of all the unit garage doors as you make it your way to the back end of the site. And then it just kind of this disconnection to any of those units at the far end of the site. And you know, one of them, I guess, let's just call it Plan North there on that side, looks like it has a little bit of access to some kind of an entry component there. But the other two units are just kind of floating out there, and I don't know, very, very disconnected. It's, to me, that pedestrian connectivity, and we always kind of rely on, in these deep linear developments, this very strong pedestrian linkage to give these units that are in the back this distinct relationship to the street themselves, when they can't have a actual physical presence on the street, but that is their presence. And I struggle to, it just looks like a lot's kind of tried to shoehorn in here to this site to see, you know, how that might be achieved. Potentially bringing that walkway access out to maybe where those planters are, and kind of reverse that and put kind of the planters on either side of the entrance to the units, so it kind of pulls that pedestrian path away from something uneasy feeling about just skirting along next to everybody's garage door to pop into an alcove that's your entrance to your house. It just it doesn't feel right. It's not going to be the right type of connectivity, and so that definitely is problematic on how that, and traversing, getting from the street sidewalk back, and the linkage across the hammerhead turnaround, or, you know, or those, I guess it's not a turnaround because those are those parking? Maybe?
This
Yes,
is-
parking?
This is a turnaround. This one is parking.
Okay. So just, you know, how that linkage is, and, you know, it's going to be important to, however it's configured, that there's some very definitive, identifiable pathway across that feels pedestrian appropriate. And then how you accomplish getting to those rear units, I'm not sure, but something needs to happen, because it's just maneuvering across the drive aisle to pop into a entry alcove doesn't really work. Those are, I guess, so those are my big ones. And then, of course, not really identifying square footages for open space, and what, you know, so staff can actually put that matrix together and show that everything complies the way it is.
Yep, I agree. The big ones are kind of always the big ones on these multi-building sites, and that's the connection of the end cap to the street, and then what goes down what goes along down this long driveway. So, you know, as Brett said, sidewalk to these end buildings that are on the street, that needs to be a building frontage. In this case, it's its own little unique building. So make it its own little unique building that addresses the street and looks like it, you know, it's almost like the perfect opportunity, because it's not the end unit on a fiveplex, it's just its own little unit. So make this look like a house that is on the street, not like a house that's in line with another fiveplex. And yeah, the let's put art on it does not have the actual building, the architecture of the building address the street. We need the entry to address the street. And then speaking to the windows specifically, which were mentioned in the staff report, that's talking about 8.4B4. 8.4B4B6 windows are required to allow views to exterior activity areas. So the intention of that is that there are windows and that there are people behind those windows. It's kind of one of our past committee members, Maureen, always put it in the context of it's eyes on the street. You know, it's the building engaging with the common areas, the building engaging with the public, the building engaging with the street. And that's what we're looking for there, not just a window in a pantry or a window in a stair tower. So kind of address the floor plan and the layout and the siting of that front building to talk to the street. And then, as Brett mentioned, of course, you know, how do we get to these buildings without walking down the drive aisle? So kind of a unique, distinct element through the drive, you know, whether that's you know, textured concrete or stamped concrete rather, that says this is sidewalk, this is different, so that when those two cars that are parking on plan south, you know, they know when they're backing up across what is in essence a sidewalk. So treat that differently, and then we'll need to see that and call it out in the site plan. And then, excuse me, the terminal view has yet to be addressed, and that is pretty specific in the plan too. I mean, in the code as well. What is it? 8.4C4 B3, and it talks about terminal views, and there's even a figure that says do this, not this. And what we're looking at down this drive aisle is more like the example that says not this. So that needs some addressing as well, because at this point we just look into a garage door, and that's kind of the worst case scenario. And then parking is short too, and I didn't see any reasons why. So we need some dialogue and some justification of, you know, we're short the required parking because we are going to provide a shared car for every tenant to use, or we're going to provide less parking because we're going to have a cross-site parking agreement with the neighbor, or just we need some justification or some of the alternatives written about of how you're going to accomplish that. That's the sidewalk got mentioned. It is noted as detached, so maybe if in your that could be more clear in the site plan in the next iteration. I think that's all I have. And I guess at this point, it's maybe back to the applicant to come back with some additional drawings, or maybe staff can address that with them. The next steps.
We can definitely take all of your guys' comments and kind of combine them all and make our corrections and hopefully bring back a product that you guys are happy with and that address all these comments. One on the parking, we are short 2 because when we flipped the duplexes, we shortened up, that space got a little shortened up because we added some common open space here instead of the building being all the way. We had parking all along the front, but we moved it back. So it kind of got rid of a couple spaces because we added some open space. We can come back with more of the square footages for you guys. So do you guys have more of a understanding of what is common open space and what is just open space for everybody to use, especially this back area? And then as far as the irrigation ditches, we do plan on piping those just for safety. Obviously, one of them runs through our property and we need that to have access to the whole property and be able to utilize it. And then we're piping the one along the side because we did want to make that connection with the property behind us so that the 2 blocks could connect in some way. And maybe we need to work on this common open space a little bit back here to make it more of a connectivity with the 2 projects, but we can definitely come back and try to address all of these comments and concerns that were just brought up, especially the buildings facing 46th Street. It sounds like we need to work on those a little bit and work on the connectivity between all of the buildings so that they're not kind of sticking out as their own. And if they are going to be sticking out as their own, then we can try to make those look more appealing along the street front.
And Jorre, are you developing the rear lot? Has that been?
We are not, but I have spoke with the team that's doing that, and that is why our sidewalk goes down the side, because theirs comes out over here and they have one right here as well. The 2 projects do have the same engineer, just not the same planning or architectural team.
Thank you.
All right, we're looking at schedules over here. If this is continued to January 3rd, materials would need to be submitted by the 20th. And if it's continued for January 17th, materials would need to be submitted. The January 3rd would be the first day that we're in the office. January 3rd.
And you said January 3rd, we need to have new materials submitted by the 20th.
That's correct.
Okay, I think that we would like to do that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll move to continue to a date certain of January 3rd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
And I'm out the 16th or 17th, whatever that meeting date is of January.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, well, that brings us to the adjournment of this application, but we will be having discussions hopefully with the consultants after it adjourns.
Sure.
Thank you. And so is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Meeting
And
adjourned.
3-minute recess.
In a 3-minute recess. Okay, then you can certainly ask your questions.
How do you get that? Those ones, how can?
They're online. Here, I'll show you where they are online.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or get a copy of it.
Well, we're with the committee, so I'm still going.
Oh.
Uh,
Well, then,
Sure.
Just tell me how to.
I am right now. Yeah. Okay. Except for Jorre still. Jorre, if you're still there, could I please ask you to stop sharing your screen?
You just cut down all our trees.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
can submit, like your
So,
own site.
If you go to Garden City's
Progress
website,
report or something documenting
um,
those trees,
and you go to
keep it
departments and
on the
development
outer
services,
file,
applications.
and then
So
they
these are
submit
still
progress
in the
report
fiscal year
for a demo.
2022.
Well,
So you would go to the 2021, 22 applications. And then you have the specific application that you're interested in.
Yep.
And so it's right here, it's 23. And so you just click on
Yeah,
that. And
so-
all of the record documents to date are in here. And
And
so
I would also
this is the
encourage you to reach out
pre-application meeting submittals and then the resubmittals, right? Presentations. And so, I believe you're interested. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to show visually my neighbors what's happening. They were absolutely clueless. I mean, they did not even realize. There's not what we're dealing with, which is why.
yeah, so, they.
And so,
There
but if you scroll through here,
a demolition permit.
It all had,
If the arborist has officially determined that the trees that
The
they
different
demolished are dead, dying. and
applications.
diseased,
Okay.
Then
Okay.
they
materials.
can remove them,
And so
we don't
there are
require
different
an
things. So this is in chronological order. So it'll say here's this middle date and then the new documents. that you've been submitting.
Okay, thank you.
Submitted
that.
Yeah.
So you will look at that.
Yeah, and so these trees that you're speaking of, they're on the property line.
On the property line, like.
Okay.
Some of them. I mean, there are probably at least 8 trees that are on the property. So, and again, like. He's not been a very enjoyable individual, so. That's like. I think it's an honest fact, that people probably know. Thank you guys, I do appreciate your time.
And then it also. To keep it consistent with you to be on top of them too.
This one.
Yeah, unless we want one of them having the entire thing.
I think we can start it.